After going through the frustration of not being able to find something that would work out of the box, I decided just do what usual developer would do, just create your own. I was trying to create something that hopefully be useful for other people as well.
What's your reason for being a digital nomad?
I do like traveling. I never liked regular office atmosphere. Yeah, I would suggest to do it.
Hey, this is Brian, and you're listening to JAMstack Radio, a bi-weekly series where we discuss the JAMstack, a new way of building websites and apps that are fast, secure, and simple to work with. JAMstack Radio is brought to you by Heavybit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. Welcome to another installment of JAMstack Radio. On the line, we've got Manvel Saroyan calling in from Sicily, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. I think you're our first caller from Italy at all for the history of the podcast, so welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I'm in Sicily right now, a beautiful city called Catania. Looking forward for the show.
Yeah. So do you want to go ahead and share your background? Also, I know that literally we spoke a couple months ago and you were in Germany. So do you want to speak about your background as a digital nomad as well as like your work currently in the web space?
So basically, my background is that for the last 5 years, I was living in Germany. And it's been already months that I have switched to the digital nomad lifestyle. I'm working on the company called eyeo, and it's a company behind a popular ad blocker, which is called Adblock Plus. So I'm involved in the mostly in the UI development. I'm in the UI team. I'm also a former website module owner. So I was dealing a lot with localization, internationalization of the websites, and also the actual UI of the Adblock Plus.
Excellent, cool. And I guess what's your reason for being a digital nomad, though? I'm curious on the rotating of the different spaces since we've talked.
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons is that I do like traveling. And secondly, I never like regular office atmosphere. So if one can like work from wherever that person works and can use that chance, yeah, I would suggest to do it.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that comes in handy with some of the work you've been doing with your side project, like CMNS. I think I pronounced that correctly, as well as some of the multi-language support you've been doing as well around that project. So do you want to talk about multi-language support and the web and how you sort of, I guess, made an itch into solving that problem?
I wouldn't say that I've solved the problem. Because
okay, yeah.
I don't think that anyone yet solved like internationalization problem completely.
Yeah, that is definitely fair.
So yes, I was lately developing a project, which I'm actually not entirely sure what is the right pronunciation for it, but I do pronounce it CMINS.
CMINS.
Yeah, it stands for like CMS with internationalization, but it's actually a static site generator, but you can also run it on your server as well.
So what was the purpose for creating your own static site generator? Because I know there's a lot out there as of today. I guess if you go to staticgen.com, you'll see hundreds actively being maintained. So what's for CMINS, like what's the reason for it?
Yes, exactly. So there are a lot of static site generators, and it was, I don't know, like 1.5 or 2 years ago, I actually wanted to create a website for myself for one of my side projects. The issue I've faced upon is that I noticed that none of the existing static generators were fulfilling all my requirements. And even though it would be possible to meet them with additional plugins and additional modifications, I wanted something like out of the box because I didn't want to maintain like the modules and the additional chains that I would introduce into the actual static site generator. And after going through the frustration of a couple of months not being able to find like something that would work out of the box perfectly with all my requirements, I decided just do what usual developer would do, just create your own. So yeah, I was trying to create something that hopefully be useful for other people as well.
Yeah, so I see a lot of call outs, like there's a lot of open source projects that always have like a call out and say, hey, we want to make support for Japanese, or we want to have support for these different right-to-left languages. I think Kenzie Dodds, who's been on this program before, has talked about working in right-to-left languages with PayPal. So if I am working on an open source project, or if I'm working on a marketing site on the JAMstack, like how do I approach Siemens, and how do I sort of interact like with my different translations? Like how are they stored, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Okay, so if your question about like the languages that are using like a different direction, it mostly have almost nothing to do with what static site generator you would use.
Yeah.
It's mostly about layouting correctly. Because if you're saying like HTML tags that using like dir attributes, saying it's like right to left document, the layout would shift. If you're using like right markup and correct styles, then it would work the way that you would expect. But there are some common issues that people face when they are, for example, having like the right or left margin, and whenever like the layout shifts, they would need to adjust that as well. So it's always a good idea whenever you are developing a layout to consider a solution that wouldn't require adaptation for different languages. And otherwise, yeah, it's like the classic solution, just overwrite it for specific directional languages.
Okay, so yeah, instead of installing left pad initially in your project, get right pad instead, if that it exists. Sorry, bad joke. I'm just throwing that one out there.
Yes. If RTL exists, like applies changes or designs ways that you wouldn't need to do it. For example, using Flexbox where possible, some other modern solution.
So I'm curious if there are any, aside from Siemens, if there's any other projects out there that solve this whole translation problem and being able to quickly be able to flip on or do some localization based on tracking pixels or whatever your domain that you're searching from. Are there any other popular projects that help solve this problem?
In general, there are a lot of static site generators that also says that they work with a multi-language website, but most of them are using like an approach, which is like one locale per page. So basically what it means is that you're creating like a separate page for each language. Let's say you have like the content for your page in English, then in German, then in Spanish. And the problem with that approach is usually in scalability. So it's fine if you're developing a project like Wikipedia, when each content in each language can be different, but it's making things complicated when you need to use like translation management system, work with the translators, and keep scaling. For example, what I wanted to do is write my content in a markdown and be able to assign string IDs and description to specific text, so I can communicate with the translators if there is any specific information that they need to take into the consideration when translating, and also be able to use other TMS to synchronize with Siemens. So it's like a different approach. One is using like you're translating page completely, and whenever there is a change in original text, it's really hard to track what exactly has been changed in the translation.
Yeah. For handling translations, I've been on two types of projects. One where we thought of localization from the beginning. So we've had the IDs set up within the project. We have proper translations, and then we need to change copy. That previous company, we only had two different translations, English and Spanish. But there's other companies where we started with no translations and no localization. So like, where would you begin if you have no translations, but you want to take this step into localizing your project?
There are different approaches, whether you would go with a easier approach, which would probably be used, for example, again, like the locale page, and you end up doing probably what a lot of people are doing, just says to the translator, here is a whole content translated to another language. Or you will need to assign strings to each paragraph, let's say, and then be able to maintain it in a more maintainable way. But other than that, there are other issues that may arise. For example, if you originally designed a layout for one language, you probably didn't consider that in other languages. Maybe it might be that you were using like the fixed width, and in the other languages, the words are becoming much more bigger, and you need to adjust your layout to be more flexible and do not consider only expected for specific language. Then it again scales down to the question whether you need to support right to left language or not. And I think I've touched also some common localization issues in the latest blog post I've published in my blog with video recording of my slides, where I also discuss some common issues, which are basically also relevant to what we are discussing right now. So I'll also try to be sure to put the link into the show notes so people can also check it out and have actual examples of how that common issue look like and what approach they can use to fix it.
I'll make sure to, I've been running a separate JamPix site too as well, so I'll make sure to include that there too. That's jampix.netlify.com. So I'm curious, when you're managing different languages, like how do you approach things like SEO and handling font files? Because I imagine going from like the ones with characters like Chinese and Japanese and Arabic, like how do you manage font files and SEOs with other countries in mind as well?
Okay, so usually things with Chinese, Japanese, and Korean characters is becoming much more complicated other than dealing with other languages. As soon you're supporting more languages, you will also need to ensure that your font itself is supporting those languages. And the more you're supporting, the bigger the font file is getting. And one approach for dealing with that is to splitting like actual font into the smaller chunks. Let's say you can extract like English or Russian characters and say whenever a page is loaded and it contains characters that are within current range, load specific fonts. So in that case, you don't need to load, let's say, full 100 megabyte fonts that support all the languages, including Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, but rather only fonts that is only relevant for a specific page. That's one approach.
Yeah. So this is me naive. As you explain this, I'm thinking of how CDNs are set up. And like if I'm going to host this on AWS or whatever, my assumption is it's going to be different data centers within those different regions. So would it make sense to have on the edge identify fonts that might be mainly used in those regions and make sure they're cached prematurely that way? Like, is that possible? Like, I think if I were to solve this problem today and I had to approach this, I might have to look at the edge and see maybe in this region leverage mainly Japanese and Chinese characters, but if it's New York, maybe do that less, but still do it.
Sure, absolutely.
Is that possible?
Well, adding additional cache is, it's a good idea for considering like this CDN. But anyway, the user will download font once and it will be cached locally. So the biggest challenge, I think, is about splitting into the chunks. So how much you would try to cache it, they again need to, you'll cache it on the server side, but they still need to download it. And if they're on the slower connection, that may still cause some issues.
Excellent. So I don't know if there's anything else we can cover about this multi-language support, if maybe you have any other sort of best practices or wins that you have, maybe personal experiences that you can share? Sure,
absolutely. There are a lot of aspects like people need to take into consideration when they're developing multi-language website. So one of the things is, for example, serving a relevant content. And the challenge is that with static site generators, you not always have that possibility that, for example, user visiting like your homepage and depending on the geolocation or language preference, you would like to serve specific page. You might not have that ability. For example, you can do the setup redirects in Netlify, but let's say if one hosting the website on a GitHub page or GitLab page is becoming more challenging. So what people are usually doing in that case, sometimes they're also having like the JavaScript redirects on the client side to redirect to the relevant page. In general, that's one of the challenge. And it's good, even though people are using like static site generators, they could also solve that issue. And that's one of the things that, for example, when I'm traveling and it's quite annoying me quite a lot. For example, whenever I'm in Italy or in Germany, I'm getting served like a German or Italian advertisement, even though I don't have like my browser set up as Italian or German set up as my language preference. So that's something that it would make sense to take into consideration. There is also one thing that if you're creating string and you need to support also order of the tags. So let's say you have a sentence and you have like links and other simple markups, let's say, and it's good to take into the consideration that in different languages, the order of the word can be different. And ensuring that the solution you are using for localization, it also support switching the order of the tags.
Excellent. Well, I mean, you do have your site that you mentioned too as well, which is manvel.me. You have your talks there. So I do recommend listeners to check that out, check out those talks and check out some of the content you're putting out there. I think this is definitely like a problem that people will have to solve more and more in the future. And I see more, like I mentioned before, more and more projects are reaching out, trying to find translators because they're trying to set themselves to succeed in new spaces. Just recently, a few weeks ago, my employer GitHub sent out a tweet saying we're hiring in India, which is going to be a whole nother slew of trying to support languages in the future. So with that being said, like we are always looking for ways to solve these problems. And though like Siemens isn't all of everything in the bag of tricks, I think it's a good step in the right direction if you're already using a static site generator. So I think listeners, if you did not get that spelling, it's CMINTS. So Siemens, and it's that CMS for internationalization. So with that being said, Manvel, if you don't mind, I'm going to transition us to picks. These are jam picks, things that keep us going. Could be food related, could be entertainment, it could be tech related as well. I have almost a tech pick, but I'm curious, would you like to go first?
Sure, absolutely. I'll start with drones because I've get lately obsessed with the drones. And unfortunately, I've lost one in Malta a couple of weeks ago, but thankfully I got a new one.
You're not like breaking any international laws by losing drones in Malta?
So be careful with high winds and interference for remote controls. Next pick would be a YouTube video from Computer File about internationalization by Tom Scott. So that's something I would also recommend to have a look if you're trying to make your website multi-language. And coming back to your question, what would one consider if need to translate the website? That's a resource I'll definitely recommend to watch first.
Excellent. Yeah, one thing to mention, I do have a small pocket drone that I got for speaking at a conference once. And I pull that thing out like every once in a while just to annoy my wife, but also have fun with my son. And the pocket ones are so challenging because like just having an open window and having a breeze, those things like get knocked around all the time. But yeah, I'm a big fan of drones, but I am also scared that I'll lose them pretty frequently. So I'm going to transition to my picks as well. I had one pick, which is kind of like a tech pick, but not really. I was hanging out at RailsConf actually last week, and one of my coworkers mentioned about them trying to learn a new language. So she changed her entire phone to French, which I think is like since we're talking about languages, actually this thought of this, because I'm trying to, hopefully before the end of the year, become fluent in Spanish, or at least conversational. And I've like hit some sort of like ceiling of actually putting myself out there and speaking in Spanish. So I did switch my phone for a little bit, but switch it back out of intimidation. But my goal is to hopefully switch my phone to Spanish so that way I can be a little more fluent before the end of the year and a little more confidence. I think one thing I noticed when I was in Japan a couple months ago is everything, because some of the local apps for navigation automatically switch everything to Japanese, and not knowing what character is what is like extremely intimidating. So I was like very, very paranoid to put myself out there and go explore too far. So that's my one pick. My other pick is I ended up making bagels. So episode 39, I had a pick of I was starting to make sourdough, and we made a sour bro joke. But the guest on that episode, Ben, he had mentioned about a bagel recipe. So go back to that episode to find the recipe, because I did that recipe and it came out successful. So I made plain bagels and I made everything bagels, which leads me to my final pick, and that's Trader Joe's, which is a local grocery store chain based here in the States. I think actually originally they were German Maybe the brothers were German. But regardless, they have everything bagel seasoning. And it's great because it's everything except the fennel seeds, which are like the most bitter part of the everything bagel seasoning. For listeners who are not, I realize we're talking about multi-language support. So if you aren't familiar with everything bagel seasoning, it's just like garlic and onion salt and all these great flavors together that can go in anything. So I personally believe everything bagel seasoning is like the new sriracha. I can literally put it on anything and it works. So those are all my picks. I know those all a mouthful. I think everybody's like mouth is watering as I explain these bagels, but follow me on Twitter to see what these actually look like. And with that, Manvel, thank you very much for coming on and talking about multi-language support, Siemens, and your background as a digital nomad. Hopefully listeners got a lot of things to start turning in their brain to maybe start thinking about how to solve multi-language support on their sites.
Cool.
And with that, listeners, keep spreading the jam. That's all the time we have for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library. It's packed with amazing talks on sales, marketing, product, and general management from founders of developer tools companies and other industry leaders.